guys, and welcome back to Betwixt the Books. We might be a day late. Don't worry about it. There are no rules on this channel. We're putting up content, and that's all that matters. And if you've watched some of our more recent videos, you know how long this video has been in the making. So we're just happy it's here. We're just so glad that it's coming out and that you get to see it. But if you didn't know, we're here to talk about Sour Cherry by Natalia Theodoridou. I think I'm saying that last name correctly. It is very Greek, and my apologies if I didn't say it right. There's a lot of letters. That's all I got. There's so many letters, guys. I did listen to somebody say it, and I think that's about as close as I'm gonna get. We're here to talk about this. We picked this one up as our feminist text for our buddy reading challenge. It could have been fiction or nonfiction. We picked this one off a list of like the feminist books that came out this year. It was one that I had already purchased, so it's something that like already was on my radar, and Gretchen agreed to read it as well. It was initially pitched to me as literary horror, a retelling of the classic serial killer fairy tale Bluebeard. I'll let Gretchen do like a better like description of the plot, because that was like very basic for me. She's better at pitching books than I am 100% of the time. But that's what we're here to talk about today.
Michaela has said great things about my skills, and with this book, my skills may fail me.
Oh no!
Well, for a couple of reasons. One is that this book is told in kind of like a back and forth narrative. Like, it's clear there's someone telling a story. So there's the story being told, and then like the present time, which is actually physically shown to you through in the book, because the present day pages have like a black edge around them. But it's not really clear. Yeah, like that. It's not really clear exactly like if who is telling the story, when the story is taking place. So it's like very ambiguous. And in the beginning, you actually start by following a woman named Agnes. She has been brought in as a wet nurse to the new lord of her town's manor. But from the beginning, there is something very different about this man, child, boy. His mother, from the moment that he's born, becomes like basically a shell of herself. And his father is basically just like, I don't know what to do with him. And so it's basically left to Agnes to really raise this child, and give him the love that she has, even though she also notices strange things. Like, he doesn't seem to engage with emotion in the same way. His nails grow like absurdly quickly. And then as the story goes along, the main character of the story, even though the story is being narrated by the same person, again, it's kind of confusing, kind of changes. So there are some parts that are narrated by Malcolm, the father. The boy gets a chapter. He is never named. And then it goes on. This story really spans the entire lifetime of this child. So it spans a lot of time. And eventually, this boy grows into a man who becomes the Bluebeard-esque character. There's a lot of weird in this book, a lot of ambiguity, shall we say. And yeah, I don't want to really go into, I think, too much more, because I will start to spoil some parts of the book if you want to read it, if you survive this review unknown. Spoiler alert, before we started filming, I said to Michaela, the more we talk about this, the angrier I get. So yay!
We always start with our overall reviews, which are always spoiler free. I don't think that anything in particular in this discussion is particularly going to be spoiler full, but you can always just leave and come back if you are worried about that. But in general, this is just our overall opinions of the book. I think I overall am less peeved by the book, as Gretchen says. It didn't bother me quite as much. I gave it 3 stars. It was fine. I take slight issue with it being labeled as horror, even though it is literary horror. I'm sure this is found in the fiction section of the store. It's not actually horror. There's like a handful of some creepy imagery, like maybe some slight horror. But I told Gretchen when we were talking about this that I feel like the original Bluebeard fairy tale is more horror than this book is. Like, it It's not scary at all. If you are a person that is like seeing that horror tag on Goodreads or Storygraph and is like, oh, I don't like horror, like it's not scary in that way at all. It's just following some topics that include some graphic elements, which is there, but not to an insane degree. I had some issues with the pacing. We both did. We'll talk about that. I thought from like a word by word, like sentence structure thing, it was very beautifully written. And I did have that thing happen where I'm reading the book where I felt like I wanted to break out highlighters and sort of like look at certain themes and when things were brought up and when things were dropped and things like that when I was reading it, which I think is a pro to a literary text. But it did very much give this is a debut novel, and had some issues going through it. I do think that this is an author that I will probably look for things in the future to see if anything is interesting to me, because I did like certain parts of it and didn't like other parts of it, which might just be a first novel stumbling blocks type thing. So yeah, for me it was 3 stars. It wasn't really anything to write home about. It's not really something that I would recommend to very many people. If you're like a weird fairy tale person, literary fairy tale person, you might enjoy this. So like Carmen Maria Machado, maybe. You like that sort of like creepy literary fairy tale vibes, you might like this one.
So my original rating on Storygraph was 2.75, and I landed on that because for me, like a 3-star book is like a solid, like I read it and I didn't hate it, but I didn't love it, right? And I didn't hate the experience of reading this book, but it was definitely one where rather than just like sitting here and idly flipping by, for a solid chunk of the book, particularly in the beginning, I just kept flipping, going as I was reading it on my phone. This is not how you turn pages, y'all. This is how you read an ebook. Like, what is the point of this? Understanding, because the pitch of this book is that it's a Bluebeard retelling, and I really hope this phrase never gets clipped as something I said, but I was just like waiting for the violence against women to begin. And it takes a weird amount of time to get there. So I was like, okay, so what are we trying to say with this? I don't understand. Like, I was just like, ah. But one of the things that I said to Michaela in the beginning was that this book was written well, but it wasn't written well. And because had the book just been like, it felt totally pointless, I would have just texted Michaela and be like, yeah, I'm sorry you waited a month for me to try to read this, but like, I can't do it actually. Like, this is just bad. But it was stylistically, like sentence level, written well. And so I was like, okay, so I'm just gonna like trust that I'm gonna like this is all gonna come together. Literary novels are usually on the slower side for me. And so I was like, I'm just gonna trust that this is all gonna come together at the end. It didn't. It didn't. And I think part of the reason that I'm deeply frustrated with this book is that like I understand that it's trying to be experimental. I understand that it's trying to be literary. I understand that it's trying to like work on multiple levels, but with a topic matter like violence against women and how these relationships form and change and really become like cement, really, that people feel that they're stuck in, women in particular. It's a really, really dangerous topic to do poorly, I guess, in my mind. And so the more we've talked about it and the more that I've thought about certain things, yeah, is it a literary book that would absolutely benefit from like a second read where you know how it goes and now you can like see all these things the book was doing as you were getting there? Sure, absolutely. But I think that it's dangerous to have a book with this type of story need a second read to get it. And so even though it's at 275 right now, I may go lower if I remember to change it.
So we'll get into the nitty gritty and the things that we took grievance with and the things that we liked too, because not everything was bad. But the big major problem, I think, for both of us was the pacing when it comes to the structure of this one. The beginning part of this was very slow and very long-winded. We spent such a long time following sort of the same handful of characters for, I want to say, more than half of the book. And then the part that you're waiting for, that Gretchen was waiting for, where it starts like snowballing into violence against women, was so short and choppy, and like flipping through all of these women. Sometimes they got a paragraph. Like it like I'm not being hyperbolic here. Like there was hundreds of pages for some characters and then barely anything for others. And I am conflicted because I think it was purposeful, right? It's supposed to sort of be a commentary on the way that in a lot of these sort of true crime situations, the actual victims don't matter and you don't learn about them. You don't get any sort of substance from them. They're just Jane Doe number 7 or whatever when it comes to telling the story. And really all of the emphasis and time is put into the perpetrator and maybe some of the people that like raised that person or like their early life, because people are very intrigued on what creates this type of person, what creates a man that is a monster in this way. So I do think it was purposeful, but when it comes from an enjoyment reading perspective and also in the perspective of, you know, this is supposed to be a commentary on this, perpetuating the same sort of thing is uncomfortable to read. And well, again, that might be purposeful. It just felt unskilled in a way. Like there were sections where it was like, why are we spending so much time here? Why are we spending so much time at this point in time focusing on this, knowing that like we're going somewhere else and that ultimately this section isn't going to matter at all. And we'll maybe talk a little bit more about why that is with some specific sections a little bit later in this review. But that was really our biggest pet peeve, was in that like structural issue. And it may have just been an issue of editing, having an editor come in and say, hey, pull this section out. It's like bogging down the middle too much. Shorten this up, add a little bit of space for some of these characters. That might have made that feel a little bit less awkward. But it really did feel like one of those like roller coasters where you get on and it's like pulling you up to the top of the mountain, except you just stay there forever, being pulled and pulled and pulled and pulled. And then it's like a 90-degree sheer drop all the way to the bottom. And it's just not enjoyable. It's just not an enjoyable time.
Yeah, except without the excitement.
Yeah.
There is no ride. The book is just done now.
Yeah, now it's done.
So as Michaela's usually the one that does this, but you know, we try to look into the authors. Is this a debut? Is a question that we have about a book like this, which we answered. With this, we also know that the author is queer, and so we wanted to check on pronoun use. And so, you know, we'll go to the website and you know, to make sure that we're like, you know, correctly using pronouns and titles and all that type of thing. One of the things that also comes out from that is you learn a little bit about the author's background and maybe what informs how this book, which is, like I said, experimental and, you know, literary and like really dealing with a lot of ambiguity, where that may have came from. And one of the things that we learned about this author is that he writes a lot of short stories, and this is the debut novel. And we were talking about how structurally this book definitely feels a little bit like tacked together short stories, where yes, they're definitely all the same narrative, but particularly, you know, these strong stories, you know, you get a really strong sense of Agnes, like I said, who's the first real character in the story, even though Agnes is not, there's not the narrator that you know is framing this whole thing. And you get such a strong sense of her and her life and kind of like this arc a little bit. And then it shifts and it goes into like someone else gets, and Agnes is still there, but like not in a way that really necessarily always feels cohesive. And it's just kind of like, yes, they become the most important person to the plot. But then also because they're narrating, then maybe sometimes we end up on like a total side quest and you're like, where are we? Why are we here? And maybe it's like an interesting scene or an interesting, like tiny arc with a point. But it definitely just, it stops feeling like a novel that should have like a more cohesive storyline. And so we did discuss about is that part of why this feels like this? Because as people who us both have written short stories and novel length things, like those are really hard to do well, first of all, but then also to like go between. Um, if you're used to, not having the space of a full novel arc to need to do it. Anne Lamott's famous thing is like the snapshot versus the photo album. Um, and this really does feel like there may have been some struggle there. Either that or there's something else experimental that was being tried on that wasn't working.
One of the big things that we were thinking about, especially because we particularly picked this text to be our feminist text, was like that element of the book, right? It's part of the description on the back is talking about how it's sort of looking at this particular part of society, the women who like make excuses for horrible men and like why women might stay with a man who is abusive, or ultimately uh a serial spouse annihilator. I guess is how you would describe that. But it did not feel necessarily that it was doing that. Like for us, it didn't feel successful in the interrogation of those sorts of things. Like I said, in that structure, the way that the essentially Greek chorus of ghosts of previous spouses who had been murdered throughout the last section of this book barely had any time, were barely there, and they get forgotten both in the text and in real life. And that feels like it's not doing what we want. Like it feels like it is continuing to serve the same purpose that those same sorts of narratives in like a true crime book would. It's not changing or twisting anything. It's maybe doing some commentary on it because it's made it uncomfortable for us. So like it's meant to make you go, wow, really, we didn't get to see these women. That's weird. And like maybe in a fiction text, you're more noticing that than you would in a nonfiction text. But we didn't feel like it was really successful in doing that. Like we didn't feel like it was pushing the boundaries in any sort of way there that made that feel good. And then, like Gretchen said, that can be harmful because it's then just perpetuating the same sort of narrative of that the women don't matter. At the end of the day, they are just ghosts. They're just there in the background, and that the story is
Nameless.
nameless. They don't exist. Some of these characters have a name and then lose it, and other characters are never named throughout the entire story, including our narrator, which we have to keep calling narrator because she doesn't get named despite maybe having like a really big role in the way that the story is told. So there's something there. It feels purposeful, but it doesn't necessarily feel like it's succeeding at what it's trying to do.
It was really interesting to read this book on the heels of a video that I have filmed but will not be out until Monday. And it's technically an entry in my pod to doc book to doc. Like we're going all over the place with that one now. It began as book to doc. And not all of those entries are true crime, but a lot of them are, because one of the things, as someone who does ingest a lot of true crime content, one of the things that I'm just really interested about is the way we tell those stories, because there is definitely sensationalized true crime, there is thoughtful true crime, there is true crime just meant to scare you. um and it's something that I think about a lot, and that's what I was talking about in that video, was like this case that I had watched a couple of different things on, and was thinking really critically about that. And so one of the things that, this is a mild spoiler, but I don't know how to explain this without saying this. But you get hints very early on, because the narrator of the book mentions, I think, like the TV or like a cell phone, a road. Like you get hints very early on that the narrator is telling this story from a world recognizable as our own. And so but the story is told like there's a lord, there are carriages, pitchforks forming. You get the sense that the story that she's telling is taking place in a very long away time, which is part of the ambiguity of like when these things are taking place and what is happening. um and so when the narrator inserts herself into the story and you start to realize that time is kind of collapsing on itself in the story, which is maybe the best way I can describe it, without like direct spoilering, I definitely started to get frustrated because there is the turning of the domestic violence narrative literally into a story, literally into a fairy tale, imbuing the perpetrator with magical powers, essentially, that make him bigger and badder than any other man in the story. And so turning this into a fairy tale when it is trying to say something very real about a domestic violence situation that you might see like in a true crime narrative did not feel successful to me, and again felt a little dangerous, because what we should be talking about more is how unfortunately common these situations are, and how many women end up in truly, this book I think is discussing a cycle of violence, um and that, you know, we shouldn't be like, this man is a special kind of terrible, because I feel like it undercuts the feminist narrative that this seemed to be suggesting, about women in these situations, and how to twist them. The back of the book promised that it will twist it on its head, and I just feel again it was just perpetuating literal myth through this fairy tale in a certain way, and because if it was trying to twist it again, we both read it and both felt that that was not twisted successfully, um, which, yeah, especially having just done that video, I found exceptionally upsetting.
It feels like this whole review has been like very negative on this book, and again, like it was middling, slower end of middling for both of us. So just to bring in some of the like things that we did enjoy about the book, or we did think that was positive, like we both said, the like sentence level writing was very strong. It was very beautiful. The characterization of some of the characters throughout this, when they were given space and time to like really be connected with, especially in that earlier section of the book, was very strong. We liked a lot of those characters when they came up, Agnes being a big one there, but also
Eunice.
Eunice.
Well, not technically.
Maybe Eunice. We'll go with Eunice, his first wife, Eunice, whose name was lost but was given the name Eunice for the purposes of this text. Like there were several characters here that were given enough space and time to like really get in them, see their motivations, see sort of like what had them doing the things that they were doing. And I think that that was really where this book like sang, and like where the like highlights of this is. And I do think that that makes sense for a short fiction writer, because that's usually something that is like really important for someone who only has like a handful of pages to get a story down, is like being able to like really get you into these characters and feel like they're real and 3D, and they have wants and needs and histories and reasons for doing what they're doing. Like that's really the highlight of this here. So we wanted to at least point that out, that that's a positive thing. I did also want to mention, like I said in my like overall review, that I got the feeling that there was purposeful things in here that would you would gain merit from, like going through with a highlighter and doing a really close reading of specific themes, where things were picked up and dropped, when things were repeated, which I think is a hallmark of a good literary text. Some of those books I feel like just feel like sad and flowery, and this one did feel like there was like purposeful choices being made here, and that it would make sense for somebody to like maybe use this text or reference it in an essay about certain topics. Like that made sense to me. But when both of us agreed that it felt like you needed to finish the book so that you understood what the story was first, and then go back and look at the themes and see the way that it was constructed, but neither of us really wanted to go back and do that, that then it doesn't feel great. So there were good things. There were things that made sense. It did like make me curious. The structure was interesting. There were things that were done well. And again, that is the hallmark of a good author, and that's someone that we may want to look for again in the future. It just maybe wasn't for us, or maybe this particular book wasn't the strongest one in general. But it might be cool for you. If you're a person that likes, like I said, weird fairy tale books, like maybe you'll love it and you want to break out the highlighters and the pens and annotate it all to hell. I think that it would hold up to that sort of reading.
Yes, we would love, in fact, if someone would read it twice and then come back and tell us
Yeah.
what we missed. But again, I was telling Michaela that a book with this topic needing to be read twice is dangerous, just like on the face of it. But also, like, a book, this is a really heavy topic. Um, and there is a lot of violence against women. It's very uncomfortable. And it's uncomfortable even when, it's not. Again, there is a section where he is serially murdering wives, but there's also the uncomfortable like way that he emotionally manipulates, or that there's all that stuff that is built into this character, rather than just making him, I think, in a way to try to say that it's more than just the murder, right? That's terrible and it's awful, but like there are other ways that this person is also terrible and awful, and not just this, in that way, a one-dimensional character. So it's not meant to be a comfortable experience. I would never want to suggest that that should be the case for a novel with this type of, telling this type of story in the way that it's trying to do it. But I think that would also maybe dissuade you from reading it a second time, at least in close proximity, um, because this is not the type of book that I would ever just go right back to the beginning and just start again. So yeah, we both like for example, there's this really really huge chunk of the book that is dedicated to the story of Tristan, who is the first wife's child. It's a huge section of the book, and when you're reading it the first time, it feels like a giant side quest. And honestly, if I hadn't been reading it for this, I maybe just would have DNF'd it in the middle, because I could not for the life of me figure out what the point of this whole giant long story was, for what I thought was a bit of character development that maybe just could have just been done in a few paragraphs, until you realize something about the larger frame of the novel, who the narrator is telling the story to, and why that story might matter in the end. And then that bit maybe makes sense. But I'm just like, okay, so but if you had, like, why was this a reveal at the end? Right? Had you told me this a little bit earlier, because it doesn't need to be a reveal, right?
Yeah.
Had you told me this earlier, I maybe would have understood more about why I was sitting through what is, Michaela just physically showed me, like, a huge chunk of the book.
Yeah.
Right? And so, yes, I get it now, but I may not have survived the book because of it to get it.
Yeah. So if you've read it or read it twice and you have more insight than we do, please by all means tell us more in the comments below. We would really appreciate it. It's interesting, just maybe wasn't our cup of tea. And maybe it's your cup of tea and you can info dump on us, because that's always lovely. We love when people do that. And maybe it'll raise our scores, because that's also happened to both of us, where sometimes we talk and like this one, Gretchen's score slowly lowers as we talk about it, and sometimes we talk and maybe one of us comes up with a thing that we didn't realize, and that lifts the score up a little bit, because suddenly things make sense and it clicks into place and we see what was the machinations as they were put into place. And that's why we enjoy talking about books with other people. Please join us in the conversation if you can.
Please. Make it make sense to me. So again, Michaela was being very kind and saying that, this review, this is my fault. This book is not on time. Like, this is like a month. Michaela was like, "Oh, it's a day late." No. This is more than a month late, because I am La Depresso Espresso. This book didn't help, by the way.
Sorry.
It's fine. I told Michaela, I was like, well, at least I went through all of that, and there's definitely something to review here, because I have things to say. I have more things to say that could be in this review that I'm just gonna let it go. But some other things have happened because this happened. Some content did get pushed. It looks like we are now going to have 2 reading roundtables in the month of October. One of them being pushed was not my fault. That was one of our participants. We were having difficulty scheduling, and then they needed to be on a trip. So I will take the blame for this, but not for that. So it looks like we will be having 2 in the month of October. We will be having one themed episode where we will be celebrating and reading banned and challenged books, children's books in particular, children spanning the gamut of children's and young adult. And then we will just have like an unthemed episode in October where we will just bring whatever. My only goal for that episode is to bring a book and not a podcast, because that hasn't been happening unless I have to for this channel. And then I already talked about this, but if you are curious about like if you are someone who likes to watch a lot of true crime documentaries, like I am, and podcasts, I am going to be talking about that genre and on a video on Monday, so we can continue the conversation there as well. And I will tell you, one of my favorite new podcast finds that has just been giving me a whole community really of other people who also care about the genre of true crime and what it means to tell those stories in a way that is respectful to victims, and not deeply problematic, because there's a lot of that out there. So check out all of that if you are interested. We will see you in October, and eventually maybe we'll read that other book that we were supposed to review before Sour Cherry. That we've been. It's fine, guys. It's fine. Chaos is the rules. We'll see you for whatever. Bye.